Hello and welcome to the latest Racing News 365.com Formula 1 podcast episode. My name is Balve Bains, and by my side, as always, are Asian correspondent Michael Butterworth and editorial director Dieter Rencken. Gentlemen, I never thought I would say this, but I missed you both. Michael, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm just counting down the days till we get racing again in Baku, marking off the calendar day by day. The 4-week break is almost over, so really looking forward to going back to some racing. And Baku's a great track, always throws up some surprising twists and turns, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. Yeah,
definitely. I've got the crosses on the boxes of the days as well, Michael. Dieter, how's your week been?
Well, I'm great. I just feel for Michael because, of course, being based in Beijing, he would this weekend past have been in Shanghai had it not been for the fact that the race was cancelled. So, yeah, I can sort of understand the withdrawal symptoms that he must be feeling if I've got them after not having been to a race for about 3 weeks, what it must be like for Michael. So, I kind of feel for him. For the rest, I'm really looking forward to this coming week. I'm actually going on Rally Croatia, And then after that, straight after the rally, I head for the UK to visit some of the teams. And then, of course, we got the WEC race at Spa, which is 30 kilometers south of me, so I have to go. So even before we get to Baku, there is still plenty of activity for me.
Yeah, we'll speak about something that happened in the WEC race just gone. But for now, Michael, I want to go to you first. And we're hearing several reports of Max Verstappen being pushed out of Formula One.
Yeah, I think being pushed out of Formula One is a little bit dramatic, but Verstappen is certainly not slow to voice his opinion on things that matter to him. And he's said in recent weeks, well, he's said basically how unhappy he is and how he's not a fan of the sprint races, the sprint race structure that we currently have in Formula One, that Formula One's power brokers seem pretty wedded to the idea of doing more of. He says it's not in Formula One's DNA to hold sprint races. Even though he's won 3 of the 6 of them that we've had so far, so it's not as if he's just throwing his toys out of the pram because he's not being successful. He's also said in the past that he's not really keen on the idea of longer seasons, and again, this is something that Formula One, it looks like we're going down the road of 24, 25 race seasons. He says he doesn't want to be on the road for all this time, and so if Formula One goes in a direction that he doesn't like, maybe he'll step away. I'm just wondering to what extent that threat is real. I mean, he's under contract with Red Bull until 2028. It doesn't follow that means he'll definitely still be there in 2028. I remember when Nico Rosberg retired in 2016 very suddenly. I think he was still contracted up till the end of 2018. So it doesn't naturally follow that he will still be in F1 by 2028. He will, if he does see out that contract with Red Bull and decides to step away at the end of that, he'll still only be 31 because, of course, he was so young. He was 17 when he first started and first burst onto the scene. But 2028, that will still be 14 seasons and close to 300 or probably more than 300 Grand Prix by the end of that. So that would still be a very, very long career. He said that he doesn't want to drive into his 40s like Kimi Räikkönen did, like Fernando Alonso is doing. And so if he does quit, the question is, where does he go? Because in the past, he's raised concerns about racing on ovals. So that rules out Indy, that rules out NASCAR. Maybe endurance racing and WEC would be more up his alley. I mean, we know that when he's not racing, he's always on the sim. You know, he's doing the virtual 24 hours of Le Mans. He famously, he was belly aching earlier on this year about there was a server issue and he and his team lost a lot of time, and there was a little bit of a complaint that went viral there. So I could see him maybe wanting to do Le Mans for real. I think threatening to quit is a little bit dramatic. I don't think we're going to see Verstappen stepping away just yet from Formula One.
From my perspective, I mean, I spoke to Max last year in Abu Dhabi. I did an interview with him, and at the time I said to him, Max, you keep talking about this. You keep talking about possibly stepping away earlier than we would expect you to. What would you do in the interim? And he said, I'd still go and drive. And that's why when Michael said just now that I don't think you'll stop driving, no, he will not stop driving, but I think he may stop racing. He gets an enormous amount of fun of taking a car to the absolute edge. He's got the money. He can go and buy himself a Formula One car. He can get the adrenaline rush. He can go and rent the circuit in Hungary, for example, arrive there with a Formula One car with a couple of mechanics, go and drive the car to the limit, do it all day or half an hour, whatever he wants to do, get his kick that way, and above all, he doesn't have the pressures. And I think this is what Max doesn't enjoy about current Formula One. All the showbiz stuff. He turned around and told Netflix that he didn't want to be on Netflix. He doesn't enjoy doing interviews. He doesn't enjoy press conferences. He's a purist when it comes to racing, and he just doesn't want to do all the peripheral stuff. And I think that's really what's driving it.
He's a racing driver that just wants to race, which is very rare to see in this day and age. Dieter, you mentioned Netflix, and a character in Drive to Survive on Netflix is Guenther Steiner, who's just released a new book, hasn't he?
Well, yeah, it's his first book. I don't know who ghostwrote it for him, but certainly the guy's keyboard must have experienced a lot of wear and tear on three letters, namely F, O, and K, because we did a quick a word count check the other day, and those three letters, which add up to a certain word, obviously, which I leave to the listener's imagination, appear something like 282 times, which is on average once per page for the book. So that gives you a sort of idea about it. There's another W word which appears a few times. So it's typically unadulterated Guenther. I paged through it just to have a quick glance before I read it properly. And one of the stories that sort of caught my eye was where he was complaining about Mick Schumacher last year having inflicted $700,000 worth of damage on the car in the slowdown lap in Suzuka. And he really banged on about that. And I must confess, I do agree with him. And I was rather bemused, shall we say, when I saw Toto Wolffs coming out in protection in support of Mick Schumacher. And at first glance, it appeared as though he's having a go at Guenther, but in real terms, we shouldn't forget that Mick is actually now part of the Mercedes family. And if they're going to wheel him out as an ambassador, then obviously they would want him untainted. So therefore, Toto would obviously step out to sort of support Mick and try and protect him. But the flip side is, I totally agree with Guenther. That was $700,000 worth of unnecessary damage. And, if you work it out, let's assume the average wage for an engineer is $50,000. You're talking 15 engineers that effectively could have had a job had it not been for that, because with a budget cap, all the accident damage comes out of that. So, and I think that we'll see more and more of this, where a driver does really inflict some serious damage under the budget cap, there are going to be some issues.
Yeah, he was also quite critical of Mick when he'd had those crashes in Saudi Arabia in qualifying, where he couldn't take the start of the race. There was the crash in Monaco where the car split in two. We actually had Guenther on the podcast last summer. During the summer break, we were speaking to him about that. That was, of course, before the Japanese Grand Prix, so it would have been interesting to hear his views after that as well. I must say, I haven't had a chance to read the book just yet, but it's clearly written in Guenther's very inimitable style. And it was very nice of him when he was on the podcast last year. He managed to keep the swearing to a minimum, but he doesn't appear to have afforded the same courtesy to his ghostwriter. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. It's sure to be an entertaining
and nor
read.
has the ghostwriter extended their courtesy to the readers, obviously.
I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into that book. Yeah, looking forward to getting my teeth into that book. Dieter, in other news, yesterday you wrote a brilliant article about F1 stewards on the racingnews365.com website.
Yeah, very kind of you to say so. Thanks, Balve. Yeah, it's an issue which I've felt strongly about for quite a while. I've in fact been fortunate enough to have attended 3 race director stroke stewards conferences with the FIA over the past 4 or 5 years. And the one thing that keeps coming out of this is that they keep looking at precedents and whatever, and that there's this list of tariffs and whatever. But the big thing is that ultimately the rule books are just so unwieldy that you're ended up with 600 odd pages that these guys have got to look at and try and understand. And I sort of go back 50 odd years. And back in 1963, 60 odd years that is, 63, the rule book was like 4 pages. And, suddenly you have 600 pages. Who on earth can understand all these? And I remember when Bernie Ecclestone was still in the chair, I spoke to Bernie about it, and he said, yeah, the problem is that the rules have just been added to over the years. And in the process, they've sort of got some conflicting clauses and this, that, and the other. And he, in fact, used the analogy of it's like an old creaky house where we've just papered over the walls as we've gone along. And we haven't actually stripped off the old paint and redone and renovated the house properly. And it's really time that the FIA got and Formula One together, sat down and worked through the rule books and wrote a completely new set of regulations, technical, sporting, financial not so much. It's only 45 odd pages and they're relatively new. But in time, they'll also probably grow and creep and become 80 pages and then 100 and then 120, because every time some team boss says, but this is unfair, or how do you read this, or how do you interpret that? And of course, then they add another clause or another article.
Yeah, Dieter, I want to stay on you and mention just race rotation as well. The F1 CEO, Stefano Domenicali, is championing a race rotation scheme as well.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely and totally against this. I was back in the late noughties when Bernie Ecclestone introduced it for Germany. At that stage, we had 2 Grand Prix squabbling with each other about who should retain the rights. Michael Schumacher just retired. Both actually played to full capacity houses. And then, of course, Michael retired, and they turned around and said, okay, now we can only have 1 Grand Prix left in Germany. What do we do? So let's rotate. Rather than have you squabbling, let's rotate. Nürburgring, odd years, Hockenheim, even years. In Nürburgring's case, it lasted about 5 years, and that was it. And the reason was pretty simple, that if they needed to do Formula One specific upgrades to the circuit, etc., and we're talking here about whether it's spectator facilities or actually mandatory safety stuff, new crash barriers or whatever, if you have a race every year, you can write off that stuff over, let's say, a 5-year period, and that's it. If you have a race every second year, you're into writing it off over 10 years. In the interim, you probably have to get some more barriers or more grandstands or whatever. So it's a never-ending debt spiral. And that's why I'm against it. And what ultimately happened is that Hockenheim was then saddled with a race every second year. There was no Nürburgring race. And Hockenheim pulled out. And today, where sort of 10, 15 years ago, Germany had 2 capacity races, today they have none. They had similar proposals for Singapore, Malaysia. They had Barcelona, Valencia. And it just does not seem to work. And, it's all very well to say, well, that gives everybody an opportunity of seeing a race. Well, in their home country. Well, you only see it every second year. I mean, nowadays, international or cross-border travel is so easy that, so what if, for example, Zandvoort loses their race? Yes, I feel sorry for the Dutch fans. But they can travel down to Zandvoort. The Germans travel travel down to Spa. The Germans travel to Spa. If you do away with the race and you have one proper facility having a race every year, it's a lot better than 2 with half a facility.
Do you think we will be racing back in Germany anytime soon, Dieter?
I don't think so, no, because fundamentally the hosting fees are that expensive. Hockenheim has already said that they just can't afford it because it's funded by the city of Hockenheim, which is, when I say small in world terms, it's small. I think there are about 15 or 20,000 inhabitants, and they're carrying this enormous burden. And, the flip side is that when people stay there, they don't stay in Hockenheim. They go and stay in Heidelberg or one of these places, so they don't even get the full benefit of the tourism dollar. And then equally, the Nürburgring now belongs to a private individual. I believe he's a Russian chemical magnate. And he's basically saying, why should I put the circuit at risk at these sort of horrific race hosting fees? So, no, I don't believe so. And equally, the French Grand Prix has gone for fundamentally the same reason.
It always boils down to money, it seems like, with this sport, which is, of course, not a great thing. Not a great thing. But not to end things on a downer, but a few days ago, Michael, there was a horror crash in Portimao.
Yeah, so this was on the sidelines, or it was a support race, a Porsche Carrera support race for the WEC 6 Hours of Portimao, which took place over the weekend. During second practice for it was the Porsche Sprint Cup Iberia, a Portuguese driver called Alexandre Areia his car suffered a brake failure at the just by turn 1 and crashed, went through the catch fencing and actually landed in the spectator tribune, which were very, very frightening scenes. Thankfully, there were no spectators actually in that tribune at the time. But I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about what would have happened had this been a Grand Prix weekend, for example. And a Formula One race is typically much better attended than a World Endurance Championship race. We do have various rounds of the Porsche Super Cup supporting Formula One events, so it could very easily have happened that this would have that this could have happened on a Grand Prix weekend. Araya, as it happens, was absolutely fine. Which is testament to obviously the strong safety features that we see not only in Formula One, which we've talked about a lot, but in all forms of motorsport these days. So that's very, very good to see. The FIA set to investigate. That grandstand has been closed until further notice, whilst obviously an investigation is going on. So obviously it could have been very, very much worse. Thankfully, nobody was hurt.
Yeah, that accident obviously was on social media far and wide, and it certainly looked very, very horrific. But I think the positive side to this is that the FIA was on it immediately. They are investigating, they will do something, and the one thing that we must stress is that the FIA, from a safety perspective, I mean, it's just an imperative. Whenever they look at something, they look at safety first, and thereafter they look at the technologies and whatever else. And this will be just another one. Fundamentally, if you have a situation where you have an accident, something good will flow from it. That is not much consolation where there is a tragedy or a fatality, as we had last week in a practice accident for the Rally Croatia. A poor Craig Breen lost his life in that. And it's one of these things. Motorsport will never be totally safe. Yes, you can strive for zero fatalities. You can strive for zero serious accidents, but you'll never, ever quite achieve it. And it's something that the FIA is working very, very hard to get as close to perfection as possible.
And yeah, perfection is trying what we're looking for. But no Formula One this weekend. But Michael Dieter and I will be back next week to preview the race in Baku. We'll see you then.